Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
People might have heard me say before that the media have two basic stories about artificial intelligence: hail our new robot overlords and build your own girlfriend. But here's an AI story that doesn't fit either narrative. It's about AI quietly and unsensationally becoming a part of the learning and development toolkit and finding answers for problems that really couldn't have been solved by other means. And it features someone who definitely doesn't fit lazy stereotypes of what an AI innovator should look like. Henrietta Palmer is Learning Solutions Manager at a global travel company and a Gold Award winner at the Learning Technologies Awards for innovative development of an iLearn bot. And that's not the only piece of AI innovation she's been responsible for. In this chat, we discuss the challenges of bringing innovation to L&D and the importance of good partner relationships with vendor organisations. She's enormously experienced, has worked on both vendor and practitioner side, and has a real passion for learning. I began by asking her how she got her start in learning technologies.
Originally, I started out doing marketing and communications. Then I moved on to become a business analyst. And the company I was working for, we're talking back in 1998, had an interesting objective that they set me. They just spent a lot of money on this newfangled thing called CBT. And my objective was to do some CBT every month.
So kids, that's computer-based training.
Thanks for that. I was 7 at the time.
Of course, yes. I was going to say.
So I duly did my objective and went to the CBT room and suddenly discovered this fantastic thing where it really worked for me from a learning perspective. So I spent much more than one piece of CBT a month. I was there every lunch hour. I taught myself project management, business skills, negotiation skills, literally everything I could get my hands on. I think the most useful piece was writing a complaints letter, which has done me very proudly over the years. And then I realised that this was something I was really passionate about, and it was something that perhaps I could move into as a career. So I went for an interview, and my first job working in what we now call digital learning, or whatever you wish to call it, was in sales. And then I became an account director working in financial services, the airline, the public sector and the NHS. And then from there I moved supplier side, working for a big travel company to kick off their strategy for digital learning. So it's been something I've done for quite a long time.
So that move from vendor side over to practitioner, did that cause you to change your view of the relationship between the two as a result? Suddenly turning from poacher to gamekeeper, as it were. And how do you see that relationship now?
It's a really interesting one. I think one of the things that surprised me first off was when I was on the vendor side. When you're on the vendor side, you're always really busy. You've got multiple projects with multiple clients, and you have to make every single one of those clients feel like they're your only client. So you're working all hours. And I assumed on the vendor side that actually those people that were on the supplier side, not supplier side, on the client side, had an awful lot of time. And it's really not the case. You're just really busy doing an awful lot of different things. But there are a lot of similarities. As an account manager, an account director, your role is really to act as the client's representative within the supplier organisation. And I found that once I moved client side or practitioner side, it was really no different. It's just that you've got a single client, but then that breaks down even within there, because your single clients or your multiple clients are then different areas of the business that have very different needs. So there's not such a huge difference between being outside an organisation and inside. I think there are a few frustrations, often just because of the nature of the business. Vendors are quite small organisations.
Yeah.
and they don't understand the scale of a larger organisation. So there'll be assumptions on things like, well, all your IT department need to do is put this piece of technology in, and then everything will be fine. But to put that piece of technology in, you could be doing it to over 50,000 people, and the licensing costs and the project work that would enable that are extraordinary. So there's just that a kind of lack of understanding of things can't happen as quickly and as easily as they might do in a smaller organisation.
Is that changing? Because the companies are getting larger. We've seen quite a lot of consolidation.
I think there's a lot of history there, and there seems to be very much that the client will shift to make the life of the vendor easier, whereas I think it should be the other way around.
Yes.
And that shift doesn't seem to be happening.
Right.
And also a particular vendor will have an enormous amount of expertise in what they do, and that's brilliant. But obviously when you're in an organisation and you're covering off loads of different learning requirements, actually you need a breadth of knowledge. And there's that little bit there. There is a real privilege that you get, which is working on the client side. And that is something that in all these years I've never lost a thrill every time I get to say it. And that's that you do get to say, I'm going to have to push that deadline back, because I don't have time to do it right now because I'm on 100 other things, and people go, okay, when can you deliver it? Which is the most exciting thing that happens in my life even now.
So how have you seen learning and development change over the years since you were 7?
Since I was 7. Well, if we look at technology, that's extraordinary. So back in the world of CBT, a lot of the training, the digital training, was then delivered on CDIs, which for kids is like a CD-ROM but 100 times bigger.
You'll have to explain what a CD-ROM is.
I'll leave that to you. Thanks for that.
Okay. Cover it off in the show notes.
So delivering digitally has changed massively over the years, because then you went to dial-up, and so all of the sexy stuff you'd been able to do with videos and things, you suddenly had to go strip it right the way back down, so it was kind of words and clip art. But that was quite good, because it meant that the actual core training itself had to be really, really solid, because there was nothing to distract from bad content. And then of course things moved from dial-up, and we got broadband, and things started to pick up again, and you could do more and more. And then obviously with mobile learning, and now what's most exciting about what I do is I'll have a problem in January that I just can't think of how to resolve it, and I don't sort of get rid of it. I just put it there for a few months, and then 3 months later some technology will have come in that means that the problem I couldn't deal with in January is now something that's very achievable, and you don't have to spend a great deal of money to achieve it.
Right, so there's a kind of perverse incentive there to sit on things and decisions and wait until the technology catches up. Maybe?
But actually that works quite well for me, because often I find that what I think is the best solution on day one, if I let it sort of filter around in the back of my brain whilst I'm doing other things for about a month or something, the solution will kind of grow and move, and what I come up with is not what I originally started out with. It's something a lot better than it would have been if I just rushed straight into it.
You said an interesting thing there, which I just want to come back to, is that when we started with very limited bandwidth, we couldn't fall back on using flashy images and graphics and video and stuff like we had before, so it had to become more instructionally sound. Of course, with broadband now, all of that kind of rich media stuff has come back in, and we're moving to 5G. Have we maintained those levels of instructional rigour, or are we going back?
Well, this is where I get a little bit opinionated, because for so many years that instructional component had to be there and it was so important. It's actually built some really good habits that will take a long time to break. So there is, I think, good solid learning in most places. but there are a lot of things and buzzwords that come up that people try that aren't just because they're the new big thing, and they're not always the best thing. One of my big bugbears is this word gamification.
Yeah.
And I've seen gamification used really, really well, actually.
Yeah.
But I've also seen it used really badly.
Yeah.
And there are certain things, again, this is a personal opinion, but there are certain things that are really, really vitally important. Things like compliance training that are as important as any other part of people's role in whatever job that they're doing. But let's face it, nobody loves a piece of compliance training. You don't sit there in your lunch hour and think, I might do some compliance training for fun. And yet people still seem to want to try and make compliance training more fun.
Yeah.
And personally, my opinion is, why would I get somebody to do a really fun game to embed a piece of learning that's going to take them, going to make their piece of compliance training take an extra 15 minutes to do, than to just complete the whole thing, get it done and prove that you've got that knowledge transfer in 20 minutes. Now, I personally know where I want to stand, and I've worked for many years in an industry with an awful lot of compliance. So it is about minimising that time expectation so people can get on with the rest of their job as well.
Can we talk a little about the subject of iLearn bots, for which you recently won an industry award, a gold industry award? Well done.
Thank you.
What made you want to go that route, and what's the learning curve like in adopting such a leading edge technology?
Well, it was never about doing something cool and new and interesting. It was about finding the right solution to a problem. Although I have to say, when people ask me what I do try and throw in AI because it makes me sound a little bit more interesting than I am. We had a specific problem, and that's that we had some this fantastic leadership content that we needed people to complete, and in the organisation I was working for, people worked in a matrix environment. So people were working on multiple projects with different colleagues in different parts of the world at any one time. And for that to be effective, they needed to be working in the same way. But the issue now is that people expect to have a personalised learning service. We're all used to going to Google, or other search engines are available, and getting the learning that we need. And the fact that there was loads of great content available on the LMS, but it was difficult for people to get to, so they were circumnavigating the LMS, going to Google. And it meant that people were wasting time on poor quality content. People were learning, great approaches, but different approaches to doing things, which caused problems at the beginning of projects. But it also meant, importantly, that people were only filling known unknowns. They were only filling skill gaps that they were aware that they had. They weren't identifying and filling other skill gaps, and therefore they weren't reaching their full potential. So we were thinking about how we could address this, and the idea of a chatbot came up that could sit above the learning platform, be there at point of need in the same way that a search engine would be. And so what it would do would be respond to the immediate question, but then direct them out to where the piece of content that was also would identify the topic that they'd asked about and recommend further things that they might learn, so that they could identify, actually they didn't know much about that, and perhaps they should go into that piece of learning and do it. So we weren't sure how we would achieve it. The idea of a chatbot came up, and we were lucky that there was a vendor that was looking to develop a chatbot, and they wanted a business partner. So we worked together on it as a joint project. So there was a real genuine need for it, and it's been really successful for us here.
It must be very daunting, though, not only that you're kind of striking onto the unknown like that, but also that you were going to create something that would compete with Google.
Lots of pressure, and actually that was one of our aims. We needed to compete with Google. And Google is fantastic, and Google has an awful lot of money and an awful lot of people and an awful lot of heads. But actually, it was a case of taking it from that massive, what is Google, to actually what were we trying to achieve here? We weren't trying to, in fact, the bots moved on from originally it was leadership. Now we cover multiple topics, but they're very specifically targeted to a group of people with a specific need, and we have an understanding of what that need is. We don't have to be prepared to answer any question about anything. And actually it wasn't as hard as it sounds. So we had a really good vendor that we worked with, who were also starting with a blank sheet of paper, but who were really open and honest with us. So we were working in partnership. So they were dealing with the techie side of it, the AI side of it. We had to look at the human intelligence side of it. This is one of the things people seem to get confused about with AI. They seem to think that the AI does everything, doesn't appreciate the huge amount of human intelligence that sits alongside that. Yes. So we're all safe for a couple of years. But essentially, first of all, my team needed to make a note of identify what content we needed and what that was going to be. We needed to curate any content that we hadn't already created or curated. And then we needed to write the voice of the chatbot. So the responses that it would make, so we had to decide and made a decision that he'd be part of the team and respond in the same way that we would. And all of that work, identifying... originally what we did was we got because we were looking at that leadership audience, we got the business strategy and the HR strategy and identified every single piece of knowledge that an individual would need in order to successfully achieve that objective.
Right.
And then make sure that we had a piece of content for all of those. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of pieces of content, which then needed to be scripted, and as I say, created or curated, or identifying what we already had. And then since then, it now supports induction. It supports things also like HR policies, because that's about well-being. Actually, funnily enough, mindfulness and well-being is another topic, and we've added some systems training onto there as well, things like MS Teams that's been implemented. So it's got that flexibility to grow, and in fact today I'm actually doing some scripting for the next new topic that's going on to it. So it's very flexible. It needs a lot of human interaction. Yes, but if you break it down into small individual pieces, think about it, it's actually no different from developing any piece of digital learning.
Right.
It's no different. It's just using the skills that we've had for years, but using them in a slightly different way. So it's not daunting.
Yeah. There must have been things you come across which are suddenly, this is a new skill area for me. I'm having to script a conversation and
One of the things that was challenging was that we needed to... We did a trial, and one of the bits of feedback that came from the trial was that people didn't want the depth of content in the LearnBot. They wanted to be directed out to those great pieces of learning. And so what we made a decision, we did some analysis on what their tolerance was within the LearnBot itself, and it was around 100 words.
Oh, okay.
And that's not a lot of words to keep it informal, light, bright, let people know that you've understood what their question is and why you're directing them out to these specific pieces of content. So that took a bit of time to get our heads around.
The Learning Hack podcast is brought to you by John Helmer Consulting. If you're a startup or scale-up looking to grow your business in learning technologies, we offer 20 years experience and all the creative and strategic support you need. To make a real impact with your marketing and thought leadership, visit johnhelmerconsulting.com today. So how easy was it at the outset of this project to identify the problems that you'd need to solve? Because I think a thing that can happen with innovative projects is that you get to a stage where you have to solve a problem you've never tackled before. And these can suddenly turn out to be big ones, sometimes showstoppers that can push back the date of delivery and so on.
I'm quite lucky that both myself and the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis are the kind of people that love that, because a really big challenge means that there's something new and exciting to learn and overcome, and it's kind of gives you a reason to get up in the morning kind of thing. So actually, we probably looked at those as moments of triumph rather than moments of horror. And I don't think we had that many of them. I think what's important to go back to is the fact that the vendor that was building the AI, the tech side of the LearnBot, was learning it all alongside us.
Yeah.
So we were very much in partnership and flow, and it wasn't perhaps what we didn't get was being that second person that's worked with the vendor with a fully functioning product, where their expectation is that you come flying in and do everything perfectly the first time.
Yes.
We were coming up against those problems at the same time, solving those problems at the same time, and moving forward onto the next section. So I don't really feel like that happened as such.
So the vendor relationship there was, did your experience and your background as a vendor help in making that work, do you think?
I think it always helps, actually.
Obviously the honesty is a big thing. I've been on projects where it's like, we don't really know how to deliver this, but don't let the client know that.
Yeah, and it wasn't like this from day one. It wasn't like that. We were very, very clear that we were both starting with a blank sheet of paper, and we were going on this journey together to see where we ended out. And there are worse opportunities to have in life, aren't there? Having been on the vendor side myself, it also gives me an understanding, I hope, of when maybe I'm having an unrealistic expectation.
Yes.
Or how people might react to something that I might say. So I'll say to somebody, I really need an answer on this, but I don't need that answer for another week and a half. Can I just make sure that I've got that answer in a week and a half?
Yeah.
And also because they understood that I knew what it was like in their world.
Yeah.
I guess there was that honesty, and they could go, well, you know what it's like here. You know that, it's that kind of feet paddling under the water moment.
Yeah.
And I think there are those benefits to having been on both sides.
Mm.
And
it must have been enormously satisfying to pick up that award.
It was. It was brilliant, actually. We were all really particularly proud of that. In fact, we've had three. There have been three projects over the last 3 years that we were extremely proud of and have been lucky enough. But they were all extremely different projects. So actually, it's quite nice being recognised for something completely new and different, because it does demonstrate, I think, both to ourselves and other people, that breadth of experience and knowledge that you've got.
Being involved in an innovative project like that, did this kind of give you the taste for working a bit more with AI? Has there been...
It was actually the second project that we'd done with AI.
Previous one?
Yeah, the previous one had been when we needed to deliver 140 modules of digital learning in, drumroll, 8 weeks. Where we used a tool that has, I don't really know what I'm talking about here, so if you are a professional techie, please bear with me. But there are analytics in the back end of the tool that takes source content and delivers out great quality adult digital learning. But again, there was a huge amount of human intelligence behind that, because the AI was only as good as the quality of the content that it was provided in the first place. And those 140 modules needed to be tested in exactly the same way that any piece of digital learning would be tested.
Right.
We actually delivered those 140 modules in 6 weeks in the end.
Wow.
It nearly broke us, but we did it.
And you've had good results from that learning?
It was a really important piece of learning, absolutely critical to deliver apprenticeships.
Right.
And I think one of the really good things about that particular project was that there was a kind of a dual functionality to the piece of content, because apprentices are assessed externally. And there were 3 components to the AI build. One was essentially read, and one was to test the knowledge, and one was to give personalised feedback. And there were, within the knowledge component, it also pulled relevant content from the internet as kind of additional reference. So you had the piece of training that used those three components, but actually, if you stripped out the reference material and the feedback, what it then created was a mock examination. So before our people went out to the external vendor, they could actually do a mock examination to find out whether they were going to pass or not, and go to that external examination feeling really confident that they knew what they were doing.
Since the kind of creation of learning content with AI and then the AI Leadership Learn Bot leading on to a more general purpose AI Learn Bot, what's next?
Yeah, so you're probably sitting here and expecting me to say, I've got this, and I've got this, and I've got this, and it's like anything in life. I do actually have a little dream of something that I'd like to do. I have no idea how I'm going to do it. It's on the shelf.
Right.
In fact, I will say what it is, because maybe someone out there will build it and I can just use it, and that would be my solution.
Yeah.
I have an 11-year-old, and much to his joy, because otherwise I won't let him use it, I spend a lot of my time on TikTok. Whilst I appreciate I'm multiple years too old for it, I do actually love it. And can lose a good hour or so on TikTok. And I just think it would be a brilliant way of delivering training that could engage people. That it could be on a whole range of topics, that people could put up content that they liked.
Yeah.
And I know that I spend hours going through it, learning completely different random things that I might not know I wanted to know. So that's a little dream that I've got no idea how I would achieve that, and it's certainly not one of my primary objectives. So I'm very much hoping that in 3 months' time somebody else will solve that problem for me, and then I can have a go with that. So what's next is embedding. We've been really busy on some really exciting projects. We've got a new LMS that's been implemented. We've talked about the LearnBot that's been implemented. Last year we also started doing some apps to engage people, and it's been all about build, and innovate. This year is all about, these were all things that were meant to help embed learning into the workflow.
Right.
So that's what this year's about. This year is all about making sure that what we've delivered is appropriate, that it is giving people what they need, that people are aware that it's there, because there are new people coming into the business all the time. But the thing that's going to be new to us, but not the world, is analytics. Right. So I think anybody out there in an L&D world knows that we all know that we should be doing more on return on investment and more on evaluation. But it's something we never quite get to. But with all of these new tools and things that we've got, what you've got is an awful lot more data than we've ever had before. And so this year's going to be very much at looking at that data that we've got. We've identified 5 or 6 things that we want to get response to. One of the ones that comes to mind, I don't have them in front of me right now, but one that comes to mind is the fact that to prove our return on investment in the business, how many people that we've trained this year have actually taken part in one of the learning initiatives that we've done, and where were they at the beginning of that journey, and how have we supported them to become somebody that's, from their career perspective, moved forward in the business, but from a business perspective, help that person become a more valuable person in the business that's going to drive the business success. And we believe that looking at the data that's available to us with all of these tools, we can really show that journey over the period. So that's the new thing for this year, which is perhaps not new to the world.
And is that about bringing different data sets together, you know, the kind of activity data, and then comparing that with the performance data?
Absolutely.
And how are you doing that? Are we going to mention the word XAPI?
Could we talk about that next year?
Yeah.
Because it's something that we're working on right now, and I don't have all the answers to the questions, but I will do this time next year.
Right. Well, part 2. An interesting thing for the part 2 would be, I've heard there's this as an ongoing debate, really. Should you use proprietary to learning things like XAPI, or should you use more kind of generic tools like data lakes? Do we have to have something that's just for the learning industry to analyse our data, or can we use more general stuff? I've heard both opinions on that, so it would be interesting to find.
Again, I suspect at the end of this year I could give you a much more intelligent answer. I could fudge something to sound good on this, but it wouldn't be with any great knowledge behind it. Certainly, we're starting out with the data that comes from the LearnBot, with the data that comes from the delivery platforms that we've got, which include things like the HR system, not just the learning platforms, and also things like our intranet as well. Right. That's the best answer I can give you on that.
Does this have an effect on the skills you've got in your team, and do you feel you have to make a change in the skill set of your team in order to make that happen?
No, not really. It's like a lot of the things that I've said. Certainly when you're on this side and it's something that you're doing every day, there is that enormous breadth of what you're doing. So you might be doing some analysis on data from the LMS. You might, because there's an audit and you need to prove that something's happened. You might be building a brand new piece of content. You might be creating content. That new piece of content could be a webinar, it could be Click Next, it could be an animated video, it could be a video, you could be project managing, you could be developing, you could be doing any one of these things. If you think about a vendor, a digital learning vendor, they've got a specialist in design, they've got a specialist in script, they've got a specialist in build, project management.
That's part of their value proposition, really, isn't it?
It is, but when you're not that company, you have to be doing all of that. Maybe not to that's, as you say, it's their value proposition. They've got people that specialise in that. So if you've got something that's really, really important to the business, let's go out there and get the best people to do it. But if it's everyday learning, then actually you need to be all of those people to make that training available.
Talking more generally, how do you see the current state of organisational learning, and what do you think of the direction it's going in at the moment?
I think learning and development teams are getting leaner. You tend to have fewer heads to cover more people. And for years and years and years and years, we've talked about people managing their own development. And I think because the teams are getting leaner, but also the reason they're getting leaner is because the world is changing. I think we've got to that critical point now where that's what the world is. But the thing is, it's not so much about telling people more widely that they've got to manage their own development. It's about L&D teams and L&D professionals changing the way that they work. And I go back to the LearnBot. Because people are going out there and they're finding that knowledge and learning in their own way. They're managing their own development. But if that's not causing problems in the business is a bad way of putting it. But if it's not happening in a way that's supporting the strength and the growth of the wider population, then that's when the learning and development teams need to come in and flexibly come up with a solution. So it's about recognising the way that people are choosing to develop themselves and being flexible to make sure that they're doing it in the way that supports the business that they're working in.
How do you feel about the debate, the blogs, the conference speeches? Again and again on this podcast, we've had people complaining about the addiction to buzzwords. Do you think that's worse on the vendor side or on the...
Vendor.
Vendor's definitely worse.
Vendor. And it creates a nightmare for... Because vendor will go, oh, microlearning. Now, you have to remember I did start doing this when I was 7. And I fail to see how microlearning is different from just-in-time learning or nudges or all of the different names it's been called over the years. It might be using different technologies and different approaches. And microlearning is only a part of, I'm just using microlearning, it's just a bugbear. I've already had a go at gamification, I'm going to have a go at microlearning now. Yeah. It's just a part of a solution. So if somebody has a broad breadth of knowledge, I always use SMART objectives as an example because it works really well for me.
Yeah.
I know when I'm writing objectives, I need to write SMART objectives because that's the best way to do them.
Yeah.
I have a terrible memory and I just need a 2-second reminder of what a SMART objective is before I write a SMART objective. Yeah. I don't need an hour and a half's training on objective setting.
Yeah.
And so something like a piece of microlearning is absolutely what I need. So actually microlearning can sometimes be the whole solution.
Right.
But sometimes it needs to be blended with something else. But when vendors use these buzzwords, there are people out there that want to feel like they're there on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
And then they start to come into the business and they go, I think we should be doing this. And we're like, well, we're already doing it.
Yes.
Buzzwords are hell. They really annoy me.
And by the way, we've been doing that since 1999 and we called it something else.
Yes, exactly. But, and then people realise that I've been at this since I was 7.
Yeah. That's all on the Learning Hack podcast this time. Huge thanks to Henry, and in case you wondered, given that she works in one of the sectors most badly hit by the crisis, no, her job is not under immediate threat. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. Please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice to get future episodes automatically, and if you're keen to help other people find us, please give a review and a 5-star rating. If you want to sponsor or give any feedback, you can reach me at John Helmer on Twitter or through my website johnhelmerconsulting.com. Next time on The Learning Hack, we're truly honoured to be featuring an interview with Danny Johnson of RedThread, one of the leading analysts covering the learning tech space. She'll be discussing her research into ecosystems. Don't miss it.
Now I finally get it.
Bye for now. Is there anything else that you're surprised I didn't ask you?
Not that I'm prepared to tell you.
Huh?